Let's face it, B2B sales is in trouble. Blast emails, cold calling and irrelevant messages, not to mention an economy causing uncertainty to spike, is creating a canyon-sized divide between buyers and sellers alike. The answer? Deep sales. Today, organizations that adopt deep sales strategies and technologies are setting themselves up for long-term success with an approach that sets their sellers up to be seen as trusted, strategic advisors by the buyers they serve. We at the world's largest professional network are sitting down with some of the most innovative sales voices today to discuss what it means to bring deep sales into an enterprise organization. Let's dive in with our host, Rob Humphrey.
I get to talk to Holly Procter. She's a sales leader of epic proportions. She's worked at LinkedIn, at WeWork, and currently at Cleary. She's taking on a new role as the CRO at Incredible Health. Join me and hear what she has to say about deep sales.
It is really cool and it makes perfect sense. And, it's sort of like, it feels so obvious to you and I, but if you're not, applying a deep sales methodology to your process, like, what are you doing?
Holly, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Rob. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I have to ask you what's not on your LinkedIn profile. I bet there's a lot of stuff that's not on your LinkedIn profile, but share with us.
Okay. Do we want like a fact or a story? You choose.
Give me a story. Come on.
All right. Here's my favorite one. In college, I was working as like an admin person at an insurance agency. And on the radio, they were advertising free tuition if you lived on a school bus and competed in a series of challenges. It was called Tuition Mission.
Perfect.
So I lived on a school bus for a full week and competed in every type of challenge, from like physical things to like brain busters. And I made it to the final two, and I lost in a spelling bee. And the word course, is it course the texture or like course the class? I still don't know, but I did lose in the spelling bee and I didn't win tuition. Instead, I missed out on a week's worth of work. So it cost me like $800 to live on the bus and win nothing.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So let's back up to your childhood.
It was the best. Here's what's good about Nebraska. Go to a farm, run around, get dirty, see how like real food is produced. It'll ground you. And it was the best. You know what happens in Nebraska? They don't care about anything that most of us care about today. It's like you have your Thanksgiving on a paper plate and nobody cares because it's not relevant. And so it's like really grounding in the stuff that matters. Good humans, good conversation, all the good stuff. So spent my childhood there and it was awesome.
One of the things I noticed on your profile is that you have a lot of education, including like an MBA. Do you think that's a requirement to sell in the modern sort of selling world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say like nobody except for you has asked me about it in the last 20 years. So that probably means no. Literally no one has asked me about it. And it's funny because, I would liken my experience at Cleary, for example, as 10x better than an MBA. And so nothing against higher education. It was an incredible experience. I actively chose to go get my MBA. It just wasn't something that fueled me. Like I'll give you a real example. You and I were both in sales. We care deeply about the profession. I got a graduate degree in business and didn't take a single class on selling. So, you graduate and there's like no curriculum.
Yeah.
Nobody teaches sales in business school. How is that a thing? How is that a thing? And I don't know, if you look at LinkedIn or Cleary or others, say the percentage of their employee population that's in a sales role, but it's a lot. And so to not have any education on the thing that like fuels the company's growth and revenue is wild. So I think you could probably pass. For my opinion, it's not a requirement for me at all.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your career, because you kind of mentioned a little bit of it. You have a really amazing career. Walk us through like the quick hits. Like, how did you end up getting to where you are now at Cleary?
Sure. You want to go through like the whole thing or the most recent past?
I think the most recent stuff. I mean, I think the WeWork stuff's exciting, but really I would love to know like what your experience was going from, LinkedIn to WeWork to Cleary. Like what was that experience like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, LinkedIn will always hold a massive place in my heart. I feel like I grew up at LinkedIn. It wasn't my first job. I started my career in consulting and then went into tech. And, I followed a very close friend of mine from consulting to LinkedIn. And I always say he changed my life by bringing me to LinkedIn. And it was 6 years of education. And I really feel like I grew up there. And I learned how to do a lot of things. One, operate in every type of customer segment. So, small, medium, large, extra large. When you think about the type of customer you're supporting, they have such different needs. So to support them is obviously ranges. The next is a lot of businesses have followed this, but LinkedIn went really deep into establishing a hunter-farmer model in their sales org. And so the difference between going after a new logo versus taking a customer and then growing that customer's footprint over time. So like learning the different motions there was so critical. And then, obviously multiple lines of business. And I was in several lines of business at LinkedIn. And so learned a lot in that transition. But no question, the most important thing that I learned was how to build an amazing culture and the competitive advantage that comes with having strong values and hiring in line with those values, and then developing your people to do big things. And so like that is above everything else, the thing I'm taking with me to my next jobs. After LinkedIn, so I was there for about 6 years and was ready to sort of spread my wings a little bit, try on a new story, take on a new challenge. And so at the time, WeWork was the most highest valued private company in the world at 47 billion. Yeah. What a world to watch that fade away. And so spent 2 years at WeWork, and even though it was wild, and we could probably have lots of years on this topic, I learned a million things, one of which was how to lead during wartime. So if LinkedIn was leading during peacetime, WeWork was leading during wartime. And, it was insane for lots of reasons, the speed, the growth. We were opening new markets every day. And probably, one of the things I take away from my time at WeWork was how to effectively use capital to drive growth at a faster rate. And so it was all around how do you capture market share? And you were willing to pay extra for that market share because you wanted to capture it faster than anybody else could. And so even if the cost of acquisition was high, if you got there faster and before your next competitor, there was going to be long-term efficiency, from getting the most market share quickly as possible. And so the question was always, if I gave you more money, could you get there faster? Could you do more? And so how do you use capital to effectively drive a growth rate in a business? Really, really good learning for me. So then in 2 years at WeWork, and things were crumbling, and it was time for me to get out. And after a failed S1, and it was just sort of a good signal for me to go to my next thing. And something I loved at LinkedIn was selling into sales leaders, and because I was in our sales solutions business, and so. For me, I was eager to get back into sales tech, and sales tech was exploding. It was sort of funny, sales is probably the last function to get, really digitally overhauled, right? Like MarTech boom was massive. Every other function, has been invested in, and sales was sort of last to go and to digitize. And so now there's an enormous amount of investment in sales tech and making the seller more efficient. And so I wanted to get on that train. And so I evaluated a handful of companies and chose Cleary, and been at Cleary now for a little over 3 years. And it's been an awesome run. So I can tell you more about Cleary for sure.
And I want to talk about the sort of experience selling to sales leaders. This is like almost meta selling, right? Where you have experts in sales watching you sell to them. So what have you learned about sales from selling to sellers?
Yes, that's why I love it, because it is meta selling. There's a couple of things I love. One is salespeople are just direct, not in a rude way. They just tell you exactly what's happening in the process, and they speak your language. So you'll be on a call with a sales leader, and they'll say something like, "I wouldn't put this in your forecast," and you're like, "Well, that's helpful. In what quarter should I put it in my forecast?" And so there's a lot of stuff like that happens with a sales leader that is awesome. But the other thing that's been great for me is, you think about selling to sales leaders, and I'm actively involved in many sales processes today inside of my sales team. And so I have seen an enormous range of sales leaders. I thought I've seen 1,000 CROs in my time. And so what that does is give you real perspective, right? You've seen everything. You've seen the range. And one thing that it did for me personally is it really empowered me to know that that would be my future if I wanted it to be. Because you could see so many people and you're like, well, if they can do it, I could do it. So you got a lot of exposure to different talent, and that means you could benchmark that talent. So it meant you could tell, and this is true of not just evaluating yourself, but thinking about future leaders you might want to work for, are they at the top end of the range, the best that you've seen? Or as you calibrate them, are they in the middle of the pack or at the bottom? And so, the range has been amazing for me to calibrate talent. The next is, it's interesting. This wouldn't have been a question for a CRO interview even 5 years ago. But now the question is, what is the sales tech stack that you need to run an efficient go-to-market team? And if you don't have a good answer to that in today's environment, that's a very bad thing for a CRO, is that it is expected that you have a point of view on the tech and then you know exactly what your team needs to be successful. And so that's also been, a big part of what I've learned in exposure to CROs.
So you've had a lot of exposure to them. You're at Clary in this SVP of sales role. Now you're going to take on a new role as a CRO at a new company. So what's the difference between these two roles? And what do you think the CRO is, why do you think the CRO is one of the fastest growing roles in the business? By the way, I've done a lot of homework on the CRO role, and it turns out you're heading into like a really big challenge because the average CRO tenure for SaaS startups is somewhere between 1.5 and 1.9 years. So I guess the question is like, what's the difference between the roles?
Yeah, totally. Isn't that a scary metric? Like a year and a half? It's wild.
Yeah.
I really hope that I bunk that statistic. We'll see.
You will.
Yeah, we'll see. I shared this with my new CEO and told her that was the average and that we had to be dedicated to disrupting the norm. So a couple of things. I love the rise of the CRO for many different reasons. Historically, everybody would group things into sales. And so they would just talk about the motion of getting a new logo. And that was supposed to encompass everything in the sales process. And the reality is that is a big part, but only a part of the whole story. And if you think about it, the funnel, right, you're really talking about, you basically eclipse everything at the top of the funnel. And so there's nothing in the CRO's purview or in the sales purview around, how to generate enough pipeline to support a sales team, how to market to the marketplace, how to get more leads into the funnel. And then once you're actually in the funnel, there's nothing post-sales, right? So once you're effective at actually getting a new logo, what happens to the customer after they become a customer? And so the combination of anything that touches go-to-market sitting under the CRO is such a good move for revenue orgs. You have somebody that has purview over all portions of the funnel, from educating the market to getting more leads into the funnel to moving a deal through a sales cycle, and then ultimately how you manage the customer relationship. So the full sort of 360 view of the customer sits under the CRO versus your sort of classic head of sales, which is really a narrow view of the world.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see sales and marketing under a more combined roof and collaborating in a way where it feels like the marketing owner actually owns part of revenue. And so that is a huge move, I think, in the CRO advancement too. And so when I think about the SVP of sales role that I'm in right now, it is inclusive of a revenue target, mostly focused on account executives on the new logo side. We have a sales engineering function, and then also account managers that own the renewal and upsell. What my boss today has that I don't have, that I think is helpful on the CRO, is he has marketing. He has business development, which for us includes partnerships. So any kind of channel or other relationships that inform the sales team. He also has RevOps, which is critical. And so those functions are obviously so important to the revenue engine.
Yeah, so the CRO role is sort of like, hey, I can't like complain about marketing or ops or whatever because it's all one umbrella now, right?
Totally.
Interesting. Anecdotally, I've worked with a lot of sales leaders, as you probably know, and recently I was talking about how, essentially the buyer's journey is changing so dramatically, and therefore sales organizations are, really trying to go, deeper, what we call it at LinkedIn deep sales, which is sort of this emphasis on technology and insights. You had mentioned this in a recent podcast about, a deeper relationship much wider than, normal, getting really into the account. So what's your take on the approach of deep sales and the idea of up-leveling all the sellers in the org? What's your philosophy there or perspective on it? Do you even know what deep sales is all about?
I totally do.
Oh my God, you do? Okay, thank God.
Nope, but yeah, I totally do. And what an effective marketing campaign. Good job, LinkedIn. You really crushed.
It's really cool. Yeah.
It is really cool, and it makes perfect sense. And it's sort of like, it feels so obvious to you and I, but if you're not, applying a deep sales methodology to your process, like, what are you doing? So here's a handful of things for me that come to mind as you think about deep sales. The whole concept in your early days of selling, in my early days of selling, where we talked about walking the halls.
Yeah.
Okay. So
totally.
like the actual charter. So in my first job, the like gold medal was to get a badge at your prospect. Like you showed up so much.
Come in and enter, and they have a desk for you or whatever.
Yes, you got a desk, you got a badge, and you were crushed. It was like almost the equivalent of a signed contract, right?
Yep.
It was like, it meant you were going to get exposure to information to help you get a big deal done, right? And so the walking the hall, sort of system is something that I haven't forgotten. It's sort of embedded in the way that I think about winning a big deal. I'm sure it is for you too, even though that concept has evolved now that, we are running a digital sales process. But it's very much in line with deep sales, right? And that, you would go, and the sphere was, you wanted a bunch of water cooler conversations. If you had a badge and you had a desk, it meant you were going to meet a lot of people. Yep. And meeting a lot of people was the equivalent of multi-threading. We just didn't name it that, right? We didn't have like a term to call it multi-threading. And so now it meant, like, if you know 10 people, and that means you have 10 perspectives on the problem that you could solve, how valuable is that to your sales process? And so if you have to go in, let's say, cold in this scenario, which is you don't have a relationship with your buyer, imagine how effective a conversation can be if you say, I talked with these 10 people in your org, and this is what I heard. And this is the number one problem your directs are facing today. How powerful is that narrative for somebody that I don't know? And if somebody, referenced my directs and a problem that they're facing, I take that call 10 times out of 10.
Yep. And that's one of the, the whole idea of, at LinkedIn, we do a ton of research, right? And that's one of the biggest habits is top performers is, going beyond sort of the normal connections, multi-threading, and finding allies across the organization. Who knows where the buying decision really is nowadays? It seems to be morphing. Also seems like a lot of people, they think they have the power to buy economic buyers, but they may not be. So, that's a whole new world. When you go into your new role, like, I'm really curious about how you're going to create the culture there, because the without going super deep, it's going to be difficult. So how are you going to instill that in the new team?
Yeah, for sure. Can I just say one other thing on the walk in the halls thing that you thought you made me think of is the concept of influencing without authority. When you talk about doing a bunch of research on an account and you don't know who can actually buy, and even if they think they're the buyer, they may not, especially in today's environment, or they may not actually have the authority to get the deal done. And it is very hard to map out influence, right? And so that's why the concept of deep sales is so spot on, because you can't find that in any database or in any tech today. Who influences who inside of an org? But that's the reality of how decisions are made. And so if I think about my time at Clary, I report to our CRO, Kevin Canerium. He's amazing, and he is very empowering as a leader. And so there's virtually no way he would make a decision without me saying, yes, I want this. And so if somebody didn't know that there was influence in that relationship, they would really miss out on the sales process. He would probably never respond to them. But if Adi came to him and said, I need this, that deal probably gets done. And so it's mostly in that scenario, not about mapping out titles. That's the easy part. It's about mapping out influence. And sometimes those people have influence and they don't have authority, right? And so I think that's the real thing that's missing in the process today is, how do you find the people that get shit done, even, if they don't have the title?
Yep, 100%. I like to think of that as preference building, just building constant preference across the org. One of the other top 3 habits of top performers, of course, is, they use data. They use a lot of data to identify buyers, the buyers that are likely to engage, essentially buyer intent, right? Mm-hmm. Have you seen sellers use buyer intent data successfully where you are now?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So, just a couple things on that. One is thankfully, there's very few conversations we get into with prospects where they're not like, oh, wow, this is incredible. I totally want this. Right. So like, I can't believe we were doing it without it. This is great. We totally need clarity. And cool, then why aren't all of them buying tomorrow? They all have an intent to buy, or at least there's an interest in buying, but there's not urgency around their timeline, right? So they might say things like, our most common objection is, we love Barry. It's not if, it's when. And that is so hard as a seller because they're complimenting your product. They're expressing interest in buying in the future, but we don't know if the future is like a quarter or 3 or 10. And so obviously we want them to buy now. And so if you want them to buy now, how do you inspire them to take an action, especially when they're so complimentary of the product? And that's where I think the buyer intent stuff is so helpful because you can figure out who has urgency to actually take action in a purchase today and not kick the can down the road, right? And so it's not just like gauging interest, but it's gauging urgency, right? Who is active? And so some of the signal to us in our process today, outside of the classic buyer intent, tools that you're referencing, is are they evaluating competitors? And then another is, are they actually have either budget allocated or resources allocated to getting through this decision? And so it might be something like they're in an RFP process. And so for us, that's great news. Not that I love completing an RFP, and nobody does, but what it means is they're probably going to make a decision instead of no decision, right? And so there's urgency to do something, and now you just have to convince them to do your thing, not somebody else's thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's as much preference as you can build. Like, you can ask the question only if you have that level of sort of influence or what I call preference with people. In other words, like, I would just ask, like my current clients, I just ask point blank, like, well, qualify that for me. What is the timeline? And I think that one thing is frustrating for sellers right now is that they're, not necessarily on the street, right? Meeting face to face as much as we used to be. I'm kind of curious how you're going to approach that because, it's a different skill set to be able to, virtually build a relationship when you don't have the advantage of always being there in person. I mean, have you considered that? And do you have a sort of a game plan for the new selling?
Yeah. You mean my new job?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've shared what that is. So I'm going to a company called Incredible Health.
This is breaking news. This is the cutting edge news. So go ahead, tell us.
Cutting edge news for like my 3 fans, like my dad and you. So very exciting. I'm going to a company called Incredible Health. They are a Series B, A16Z backed company. And the CEO is a woman named Aman Abuzaid. And she's incredible. And no pun intended. And the company is a marketplace for nurses and hospitals. So obviously, as you know, the nursing shortage in the U.S. is only getting worse. The gap is growing year over year. And so there's a real problem in healthcare around not having enough nurses to staff a hospital. And so the ability to hire a permanent nurse into a hospital is growing harder and harder and is a hair on fire problem. And so given it's a hair on fire problem, the charter that Aman and team went out to solve is closing the gap between the hospital and the nurse. And so this marketplace, the nurse joins Incredible Health, and instead of them applying to a job, the hospital applies to the nurse. And so they're already pre-vetted with their qualifications, their skill set, and the hospital applies to the nurse. And
nice.
That in that way, it's a faster time to hire. It's a more cost-effective time to hire in an environment where every day matters and care is what's on the line. And so, really pumped to join the Incredible Health team to go help them solve this challenge. And I start here in a few weeks.
That's awesome, and congratulations! They're lucky to get you over there at Incredible Health. So, what when you go and start hiring people, which I imagine you would be doing? How are you going to create? How are you going to sort of create the culture of sales differently? And it seems like a really wacky world in sales leadership. So I'm really curious. Like, what are you going to do different?
Yeah, totally. I've been thinking about this probably nonstop since I decided to accept the offer. What I do differently, not just in my time at Clary and I as I transitioned to the CRO role, but also what a cool opportunity to build a culture. And I'm sure one of the things I don't know is what I'm inheriting. I imagine that they're an awesome crew. They've done a lot of great work to get to this place before I entered the picture. And so I can't wait to see what they've done and to build on what they've done. And so that's sort of step number one, is come in and observe and see what you're inheriting. But there's a couple things. I was just recently listening to a podcast with Gamson or re-listening to a podcast with Gamson, and it was the Go-to-Market Grit podcast with him. And there's several things that I took notes on that we both know intuitively, but were great reminders. One of which is the importance of defining the expectations in the role so everybody knows what's expected of them, right? And just how critical that is and how often people miss it, right? Is like, it's just sort of assumed, especially in sales, my job is to hit my number. Well, that's not really true. Like, there's a lot of other things that I care about to define whether or not you're a great seller. And so how do I define it so it's crystal clear to both you and I what success looks like for you on the job? And so defining the expectations will be, a big part of what I do. The next is, this is something else that's a Gamson original that I'll continue to borrow forever, is, he talks a lot about defining the standard, right? You define the standard you expect, and then you demonstrate the standard. You lead by example, and then you hold other people accountable to the standard. And so one of the biggest things for me is I need to show up. I will always do this, but especially in my first 30 days or so as you're making an impression, as demonstrating what I want everybody else to do, which is I want to lead with compassion. I want to operate with integrity. I want to have, an enormous amount of authenticity in the way that I operate, which means, I'm going to dig in and get to know them and care deeply about the work that they're doing. And there will be nothing that I won't touch during that window. And so I think that's a huge part of setting the table right when you get there.
Well, that's super exciting. And by the way, Mike Gamson, for people that don't know, was the global sales leader at LinkedIn for almost 12 years and a mentor to many people, including myself. Incredible leader. Now the chief executive officer at Evozyne. Incredible guy. We've all learned so much from him, and I'm glad you're highlighting some of the stuff you've learned as well. Let's dig in a little bit to the sales culture stuff. Look, we're not pilots. I have seen, however, a lot of sales organizations focused on one of the main habits, which is, relentlessly focusing on where the white space is, especially early stage, right? Do you think that top performers, are you hiring for this sort of account capability, this capability to sort of go super deep where the white space is?
I don't know how many orgs out there have gone through, at Clary, we talked about it as focused capacity, which is you assess what is required inside of the role, and you figure out if it makes sense for you to reduce that scope of the role to just a handful of things that somebody can go all in on, and they're focused on just that thing. And so, for example, when you think about hybrid roles, like I think Salesforce does mostly hybrid roles where somebody acquires a logo and then retains that logo. There's pros and cons to those models, but in my last handful of jobs, we have done something around focus capacity where the whole role, when you think about white space, you're able to do that if your job is organized in a fashion where, it's sort of simple that you have a handful of accounts and naturally you organize by what's remaining on those accounts versus you're trying to do 15 things. And then it's really hard to create focus and to, go after just those with the most white space.
What's your thinking on sales technology? And I'm really interested as well in sort of your perspective on generative AI. Like, how's this going to impact the sales world?
Yeah, totally. All the rage right now. So a couple of things. I'll start with sales tech and then come back to generative AI. First of all, I'm grateful for how much investment there's been in the function over the last, let's call it 10 years. It's just blown up. And so the amount of resources that we have today that we didn't have in the past is 10x. And it just allows us to be so much smarter with our time. And so it is sort of a requirement in today's world. This isn't about somebody's experience or age. It's about their exposure to technology, is that if you're not using technology to make you faster, more efficient, then you're probably falling to middle of the pack. And one of the things that's sort of interesting about the sales tech is that if you use it well, it can actually cover some of your flaws in your sales process and in your technique, right? It can help you overcome some of those barriers because, you've used technology to bolster your performance. And so it's a requirement in today's world, and it'd be such a miss. So much so that, this is one that'll probably resonate with you. But so much so, like it drives me bonkers in my sales process today when I see a rep, reach out to me when there's such a cleaner way to get to me, right? Yeah. Through a relationship or something else. And I'm like, if you just would have done like 2 minutes of research, you would have nailed this ask, right? And because you didn't, you're not getting it. And so there's a lot of ways that makes it easy to lose. And there's a couple ways that makes it easy to win. So like do yourself a favor and use the technology to help yourself win. Yeah. And that's inclusive of obviously sales Navigator. But some of the other tech that's been critical, like I can't imagine doing my job without Clary today. Like the ease of being able to inspect my pipeline is so critical. When you think about call recording, do you remember back in the days when you used to like go link your headset into somebody's call in order to be able to listen to a call because you were trying to onboard or learn or get better? And the barrier to entry on having that experience was so high. Like your calendars needed to align, you needed to physically be in the same place, right? There was just so much resistance to you improving your craft. And now there's no resistance to you improving your craft. You almost have the opposite problem, which is you could listen to any sales call that exists in your org today, right? And the question is like, how do you spend your time and are you listening to the right ones? And so there's so much exposure to information, which of course makes us better. And then,
that's awesome.
Do you want to talk about the generative AI stuff?
I do. I'm really interested in what you think here.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that has annoyed salespeople forever is the busy work associated with our jobs, right? It's not the strategy. That's the thing we all love, right? There's so much sort of follow-up. There's so much note-taking. There's so much, sharing with others in your org, managing up and ensuring that everybody that might care about your opportunity has the latest. And that's all the stuff that's going to go away. Right. All of that will be automated. Yep. All of that will be able to be created on your behalf from a generative AI of your choosing. And so it will just be so much easier for you to do more. Right. And so I do think it probably means like at the crux, like, I don't know if we'll need as many sellers, right? You're going to be able to like your patch. Like one of the things we should measure over time is like, will your patch size or your territory size actually increase because your coverage of that territory will probably improve. Right? Yeah. There's so much stuff that you're going to be able to do or that will be automated on your behalf. And you're just going to be able to spend your time in the stuff that only you can do, like actually, conducting the call with another human. But all of the mundane sort of managing up, follow-up, all that stuff will be automated and probably before you even wrap up your call.
Who else inspires you, Holly, whether they're sales leaders or not? Who do you get your sort of juice from?
Yeah. So, I've just gone through this interesting process recently where I evaluated a new role. And one of the things that process does is, it forces you to go seek expertise. At least it does for me, right? It's such a big decision that you want to make sure that you're thinking about it right. And therefore, you go call all the people on your board that have been meaningful for you. And so in the last month, I've been able to have these very deep and powerful conversations with people that are very important to me. That I admire. And so the people on the list for me, you'll know some of them. Jonathan Lister has been incredible to me. Peter Kim has been incredible to me. And then Mike Darizan has been amazing. And so I've been able to connect with all of them in helping me navigate this big decision. And then I'll talk about my current boss too, Kevin Canarium, who once I told him was just phenomenal in helping me navigate too. And first of all, the lesson across all of these people is that they prioritize the individual. What is best for this person's life and their career, and agnostic of their company allegiance, right? Because we're all, loyal to and love the companies we work for. But the thing that trumps all of that is what's best for this person, and if you put that at the center of your decision making, you're probably, doing the right thing. And so like that's been critical. I'll share a couple advice and tidbits I got from each one of these people. So Peter Kim said something to me that I'll never forget, and there's a lot of those around Peter Kim, but one of them was, he's like, if you're into the startup thing, which I am, he's like, especially for startups that are run by their founders, that's, you talked about the tenure being, 18 months-ish. And one of the reasons why it goes south is the relationship between the CRO and the CEO, right? Yes. Is the friction in the relationship. And so the positioning he gave to me is, whose dream do you want to bring to life? Because it's not your dream, right? It's theirs, and you are bringing it to life. So whose dream do you want to bring to life? That was so powerful for me, and really helped me cement my decision to go to Incredible Health. Aman Abu-Zaid is the CEO of Incredible Health, and she is this incredible leader who happens to be a minority woman founder. And if you talk about like the story that I want to help bring to life, I want her to win all day, every day. And if I spend the next, 5 years bringing her dream to life, I get deep purpose, behind that. And so I'm super excited to help her win. And that was a really good framing from Pete. And I love that, especially for people that are interested in the startup game. One of the things that Lister helped me navigate is a lot of conversation around stage and the potential outcome of the company. And so we talked about, like, if a company is going to have a single, a double, a triple, a home run, how can you evaluate the size of that potential outcome and the time horizon associated with that outcome? I think the time horizon is something that people often underappreciate, right? They think about just like the end outcome. But if that end outcome is 10 years from now, like, that is so long. Like, if you and especially for a CRO, like, are you going to buy your options? Like, 10 years out, the amount of risk associated with that is enormous. And so, Lister was just so helpful. I mean, he's, outside of being an amazing human being, so helpful. And we're actually connecting again. I have several things he's going to help me prepare for in the new role. And so, having those people that you can lean into. And Darazan actually ended up being a backdoor reference for me. And, so we got to connect many times on how he was evaluating the company. And so, he gave me some good advice too on both my current position and then what I was walking away from Clary and how to think about them, how to compare and contrast, and the incremental experience I might get at Clary if I stay versus if now is the right time to go. And so having an impartial party, somebody that didn't work at either company, but could just really put me at the center of the decision, you're just eternally grateful for those people.
You're hitting on some heavy hitters. I mean, Peter Kim, I believe, is the chief sales officer at Relativity. Amazing guy. I think Jonathan Lister, I know he's at COO at Vidyard, which is really a fascinating company. Like, the stuff they're doing with sales and marketing and video is just insanely incredible. Of course, our friend Mike Darazan was really one of the most instrumental people in my career, for sure. And he's over at in the blockchain world, in the crypto world at Chainlink as the COO. So these are all people everyone should definitely follow. They're actually pretty active on LinkedIn. So I'm always picking up some bits for them. But I'm glad to hear you to give some advice from those inspirational folks, for sure.
Yes.
Really critical question for you. And I already know the answer now that I know your kids' names, but Rolling Stones or Beatles for you?
It's the Beatles. Hey,
I know.
I mean, like, I literally named my baby after. That's
so cute.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. And there's quite a story behind that particular song as well. Let me throw another one at you just to kind of get a sense. And I feel like I'm going to know what you're going to say here. Taylor Swift or Earth, Wind, and Fire?
Obviously it's T Swift. She's just a boss. Like, she's crushing, and T Swift. Don't you wish that you were in charge of her tour and you could just add like a couple more spots? Like, she's just crushing out there.
I know. I'd like to add a spot where she comes and does a private concert up in my cabin in the woods, and it's just, maybe like a couple CRO. It'd be great if you and Peter Kim, Darazan, Gamson, there's plenty of other people we could throw in the mix there. Alyssa Merwin, like to throw her in there.
Yes.
And we just have a private concert with Tay-Tay, and I think that'll be great. I'm off track a little. So I've been out there using Sales Navigator the whole time, right, since it's been invented. And I'm like, I don't think I could go to a company where it doesn't exist. But let me ask you this, Holly. Sales Navigator, you've used it. What's your thinking on it and its evolution? And, has it been useful?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. Obviously, I was one of the first people to make their way from LTS and go over to Sales Solutions and help, stand up the business. And it's been incredible to watch its evolution over the last several years. And the product just continues to get better and better. I can share a couple things about how we use it and how it's been impactful for me. We also had LinkedIn Sales Insights, and that's been our source of truth in the way that we navigate and actually divvy up books outside of Clary. And so that's also been critical, is having that insight into our CRM. And in Sales Navigator, a couple of things. The ability to share your account list and isolate the handful of executives that you're trying to go after. And inside of Clary, we run an executive playbook. And so we have an incredible board, we have tons of advisors and a great leadership team, all of whom are willing to go, deep with us and helping us break open, especially our big enterprise accounts. And so what is so incredible about Sales Nav is that you can look at a rep's top 5 accounts. You can see the top executives we're trying to go after. And within a minute, you can figure out exactly where our easy entry points are. And we have a whole motion built out around how we go after that executive and the ghost notes that we write to support that executive or the board member. And it has been no question, especially in our first handful of years going to market. It was the way that we broke down so many doors. And if we didn't have LinkedIn or didn't have Sales Nav, I think the way that we probably would have navigated that would have been wildly manual, which would have just never worked for the seniority of the people that we were asking to help. And so it's been game changing for us.
Awesome. What's your favorite LinkedIn feature just across the board?
Ooh, LinkedIn feature across the board. One of the things I love the new feature around you being able to pronounce your name. It's so helpful, especially if you interview a lot of candidates or lots of customer conversations. There's nothing worse than saying someone's name wrong. It's basic, but...
Or you're on that call, when you're on that team call and there's hey, Anastasia,
Right.
How do I pronounce your name? It's the opposite of... Mike Gamson's great to see you. Fascinating discussion with Holly Procter. Holly, we're so grateful to have you on the Deep Sales podcast. We've covered so much. What kind of parting words do you have for sales leaders out there trying to make it happen?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Rob. Always a pleasure to spend an hour with you, my friend. And parting words. I would say it is rough out there, and so our mindset matters. And so, to the extent that you can have a practice in your life to help keep you centered and focused and navigate what is arguably one of the hardest markets we've seen in a long time, I think it'll serve you well. So wishing everyone out there well as they navigate these tough times.
Yeah, mindset. That's really important. I think that's a good way to end this. Mindset's definitely going to matter going into this. Anyways, great to have you, Holly, on the show on Deep Sales Podcast. Keep the sales deep over there, and congratulations on your new role. I can't wait to see what you do over there.
Thanks, bud. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the Deep Sales Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and share. See you on our next episode. Or for more deep sales insights in the meantime, check out the LinkedIn Sales blog. As always, happy selling.